You either love somebody or you hate them.
Seems 1,000 centuries ago.
This war, things get confused out there.
All that matters is that you are alive. You are alive, Captain.
Horror has a face, and you must make a friend of horror.
I would like to thank those who have supported my channel by watching, subscribing, and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate your support and welcome you to my film analysis of Francis Ford Coppola's 1979 Vietnam War epic Apocalypse Now Redux, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and co-written by Coppola and John Milius. In the book of Genesis in the Holy Bible, Adam and Eve sinned but thought that they could hide their sins by covering themselves with fig leaves. And likewise, in Francis Ford Coppola's 1979 Vietnam War epic Apocalypse Now Redux, Chief tries to take a girl to see a medic.
Bring her on board.
For injuries he caused by shooting up the girl's family on their fishing boat. And then an army priest gives communion to dead Viet Cong soldiers in a coastal village. And then there are the commanders of ComSec intelligence at Nha Trang sending Colonel Kurtz and other trained killers to do humanitarian work. Captain Willard detests lies and hypocrisy, for after completing his first tour in Vietnam, he returns to the United States and hardly says a word to his wife before saying yes to a divorce. Willard has gotten all the way off of the boat as Colonel Kurtz has gotten all the way off of the boat after seeing for himself the extremes to which one must go in order to defeat the enemy. Now, I'll go a little more in depth, starting with the airstrike. The airstrike represents the penalty of death over Adam and Eve after they disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden. Let me explain. The word Almighty is the radio code for the airstrike to destroy Kurtz's Cambodian stronghold.
Street gang, this is Almighty. Do you read me over?
And the natives that worship him as a god. While in the Holy Bible, the word Almighty is also God's name. Also, in slaughtering Colonel Kurtz with the machete, which coincides with the Montagnards sacrificing a water buffalo to their god, Willard avoids the penalty of death as Kurtz represents the foreskin or flesh, separating Willard from God. Remember that killing other men came as easy as breathing for Willard. After all, he had assassinated a government tax collector, among many others close enough to blow their last breath in his face. He is also as cold in shooting the wounded girl in the sampling boat to put her out of her misery instead of taking her to a medic. But killing Kurtz is not as easy as breathing for Willard because he and Kurtz are both Americans. They are both soldiers and they both bear witness to the same hypocrisies and insanities on the Nung River. However, in killing Kurtz and reconnecting with God, Willard is born again and calls off the judgment of the Almighty or the airstrikes to destroy the Cambodian jungle and the natives, whom he now sees as humans like himself. And as the crucifixion of Jesus Christ reopens the tree of life to man after the fall of Adam closes off the tree of life to man, if Willard had not followed through with his mission by crucifying his respect, admiration, and empathy for Colonel Kurtz, Kurtz would have called in for the judgment of the Almighty or the airstrikes to destroy the Cambodian jungle and all of the natives in it, as he had written in his diary. Drop the bomb, exterminate them all.
I still think we ought to take the dice off now. I think we let brown people get around 200,000 people. Well, no, I'd rather use a nuclear bomb if you got that ready. That, I think, would just be too much. The nuclear bomb? That probably. I just want you to think big, Henry, for Christ's sake.
How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High.
In this passage from the book of Isaiah, Lucifer rebels against God, and similarly in Apocalypse Now Redux, Colonel Kurtz rebels against his commanders after getting all the way off of the boat by staging Operation Archangel, killing 4 Vietnamese double agents and disappearing into the jungle. Another allusion to Kurtz as both Lucifer and Satan occurs at Willard's briefing in Nha Trang, in which General Corman describes Kurtz as a good man, or Lucifer, before going rogue and becoming a Satan by breaking off with ComSec intelligence, or God, and going to live among the Montagnards, or mankind, as a god in the Cambodian jungle or earth. Also compare Kurtz establishing himself as God over the Montagnards with 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4, which states that in their case the God of this world, meaning Satan, has blinded the minds of the unbelievers, or the Montagnards. Now let's take Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 2, describing Satan as the prince of the power of the air, and also the first verse of Isaiah chapter 14, which says, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, and compare both of these verses with Kurtz transferring to, quote, airborne, unquote, or jumping out of airplanes after making the decision to cut off his commanders. And as Lucifer is one of 3 archangels, along with Gabriel and Michael, so is Kurtz's operation called Archangel, which he carried out on his own without official clearance from ComSec intelligence at Nha Trang.
After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life.
In the same way that Adam, in eating the forbidden fruit, rejects God's authority by doing things his way, Kurtz rejects his commander's authority at Nha Trang by doing things his way. Consequently, in choosing to go their own way, both Adam and Colonel Kurtz are cut off from their sources. Mankind's disconnection from the Garden of Eden and Lucifer's banishment from heaven are both parables of Kurtz's memory of the Ohio River and a gardenia there that was so beautiful at one time that it seemed as though
Heaven just fell on the earth.
Also, compare Kurtz's description of the gardenia as like heaven had fallen to earth with the Lord's Prayer in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 10 in the Holy Bible. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Also, there is Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15, which states that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. Now compare Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15 and Kurtz's description of the gardenia as having fallen to a wild and overgrown state with the Garden of Eden after God kicks man out of it. For without man to cultivate the garden means that it would also fall to a wild and overgrown state. Now, let's compare the gardenia and the Garden of Eden to Kurtz's stronghold in the Cambodian jungle. The neglected states of the gardenia and Eden are both metaphors implying what the Cambodian jungle became after Kurtz got off the boat and cut himself off from ComSec intelligence, or his source. Also compare Adam being banned from the Garden of Eden and breaking off his relationship with God by sinning to Captain Willard divorcing his wife so that he could return to the jungle, and also to Colonel Kurtz breaking off with his commanders and building a stronghold in the Cambodian jungle. Captain Willard has killed many people in Vietnam. However, he cannot remember any of the people he killed. Therefore, as a flaming sword turning every which way keeps man from accessing the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, and as the enemy blows up the Do Lung Bridge to keep the American soldiers from crossing it, the horrors of warfare cannot touch Willard's heart by the blood of those he cannot relate to as an American and as an officer, as his capacity to feel the horror of killing human beings can only be restored by the blood sacrifice of Colonel Kurtz, whose death is the price for those whom Willard killed on behalf of the CIA. And after assassinating Kurtz, Willard returns to the boat, the Nung River, and conflicts, Operation Brute Force, and most importantly, that between good and evil, unlike Kurtz, who has conceded his spiritual struggle to evil. It happened when he was an operations officer in the Special Forces, when he and a group were sent into a camp to inoculate children for polio, when he was called back to the camp and found the arms of the very children that they had inoculated in a pile, when his eyes were opened by this incident and the pointlessness of his conflicting roles as a humanitarian and as a killer, that each canceled out the other, as loving someone and hating them at the same time canceled out each other. But you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. For the moment that Kurtz acted on this epiphany of the extremes to which he must go to win at any and all costs was the moment that Kurtz bit the fruit, engaged the enemy his way, and eventually cut himself off from his source, or Nha, and crossed over into the Cambodian jungle with his army. And here, Kurtz, the man, died. As Adam died spiritually by cutting himself off from God's presence in the Garden of Eden, and as a rose begins to die the moment that it is cut off from its source, Kurtz had gotten all the way out of the boat on the river of conflict that connected him to his source and had become an animal. As Willard had gotten all the way out of the boat in divorcing his wife and returning to the jungle, until he accepted the mission to redeem himself to the river of love and hate, moral conflict, and God by killing Colonel Walter E. Kurtz. Which takes us back to the question of whether it is possible for conflict to coexist in the same house, to love and hate someone at the same time or exclusively, or whether a person can only be capable of either good or evil but not both. At the French plantation in Apocalypse Now Redux, Madame Surratt, while smoking opium with Willard, recalls a conversation she and her husband had had before he died of cancer, when she explained to him that he was two men, one that killed and one that loved. When her husband confessed to her that he did not know whether he were an animal or a god, and she told him that he was both an animal as well as a god. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks for watching my film analysis of Francis Ford Coppola's 1979 Vietnam War epic Apocalypse Now Redux. And be sure to hit the bell to be notified of my next film analysis that I'll be dropping very, very soon. Until next time.